Hey, is that Selena?
Yeah.
I'm a bad girl, I know. You should slap me. I'm naughty, I know. I'm in trouble. I'm in trouble in it. She's the first one that comes up. Like, it's really like you're in trouble. I'm sorry. I will. As soon as this meeting's done, I'll do what I'm meant to do.
I love you same way, doesn't matter.
I love you too. Good to see you, lovely. Good to see
Good to
you.
see you.
Who else we got? Rupert, good to see you. Naz, Emma, Shadi, Jessica, good to see you. Oh man, I love it. All of these lovely faces. It's really sad. This is like the last session, right?
Is it?
Yeah, this is the last masterclass.
Oh, man.
My gosh, we're coming to the end. I mean, obviously, it doesn't mean that we disappear for the rest of your lives. Do you know what I mean? And there's obviously still a network and there's still community and, and we've got the mighty networks. But in terms of masterclasses, we meet up once a month. I mean, you'll be invited to other masterclasses, but this is the last one. I'm feeling quite emotional. It's a goodie. We left one of the best to last, This is a real goodie. Quite a
no pressure there then.
And this one is quite personal to me, actually.
I'm not sure it's masterclass you're going to get, guys.
This one's quite special to me, actually, if I'm honest. I've known Tamara. I'm not going to say how long I've known Tamara because both of us are way too good to be being aged like that, right? But I've known her a minute since I've started out in the industry. And when I started, I was like a research and this woman would just walk around the office with these heels, man. And she would just shout at people, but just talk firm. And I've been told that you can't be this person. You mustn't be, I've got to watch how I talk and I'll never make it because I'm not middle class enough and I'm not this enough and I'm not that enough. And there's this woman who's just being herself. And I'm like, well, how does she do it? And I can't do it. So she really inspired me to just find my own voice and feel comfortable in the skin that I'm in. And that was many, many moons ago. To kind of have her here and see the kind of what she's achieved and what she's contributed to the industry and to have her come and talk to us is really, really special. And particularly as it's one of our last sessions. So I just want to say a huge, huge thank you. I've got loads of love for you and loads of respect for you. So I'm really glad that you're here with us. And I'm going to hand over to Babita, who we know that we love as well. How special it is.
Simon on that as well. Back to you.
Yeah. Babs, over to you, lovely. And actually, before we start, we should probably get a sense of how people are feeling in the room and just make sure and what they want from the session as well, actually, before we jump into it. But I know that you're going to take the lead in the session, and I'm really looking forward to this. So, Babs, over to you.
Thank you, Simone. And look, I feel exactly the same about Tamara. I was new to the BBC, and I used to sort of watch you from afar and just be totally in awe, not just of the heels, but just how you conducted yourself, how you did business, how you commanded respect. So for me, this is very special too. So sort of admired you from afar at the BBC, then to be working alongside you at Fremantle. And I have to say, Fatima and Tamara were the reason I came to Fremantle. So I feel really privileged to work alongside you. So that's my intro, but the official intro is, so Tamara is Director of Commercial and Operations at Naked. She works alongside the Managing Director to shape and deliver Naked strategic plans and firmly leads on commercial business development, overseeing the day-to-day operations. She was formerly MD of Vice TV and Productions across EMEA, and she oversaw the strategic direction and commercial operation of Vice TV's networks across the region, which reaches 30 million households across UK and Ireland, France, Benelux, Israel, and New Zealand. Before becoming MD of Vice TV Production, Tamara was Chief Content Officer for Vice, charged with leading Vice's content strategy across the EMEA region. And before that, she was at the BBC, where she held several very senior roles, including Controller of Business, Comedy and Entertainment. And in those departments was responsible for a portfolio of programmes that you'll recognise, including Strictly, Fleabag, Top Gear and The Apprentice, and everything comes full circle because The Apprentice is now a naked show. Tamara's started in the independent sector of TV in 1989. And we're actually both, sorry, Tamara.
84, actually, sadly.
Oh, right, okay, even earlier. It's also a pleasure to serve alongside Tamara on the board of Edinburgh and we both serve on that foundation board, which is trying constantly to bring new talent. Loads to talk about, but I'm going to take it right back to the beginning. So you've had an incredible over 30 years in the industry. Tamara, what did you want to achieve when you started out?
If I'm honest, I didn't have a clue when I started out in television. I was probably like most young Black people in that era who didn't see it as a place for us. And I kind of stumbled into it. My dad started a production company, and he suggested I think about TV, and I thought, why not? And so when I entered in on a trainee scheme, I literally had no idea. I had no idea of the roles that existed within television. I had no idea of the career possibilities. I certainly didn't know how much money they got paid compared to the job I just left or been sacked from, should I say. So yeah, I was really quite naive. To give you a bit of context, I'd had one job before after leaving school. I was 19 at the Savoy Hotel, and that was like a really oppressive environment. I used to have to enter through the staff entrance. I used to have to clock in with a card, and I wasn't allowed to wear trousers. And invariably, being from the kind of family that I was from, I was a little bit rebellious. I took too many days off. I wore red leather trousers to work and got sent home for it. And I lost my job. And so when I started out, my main sort of drive was to, one, get a job, and two, keep a job. And, you know, so I just wanted to do the best job I could do. I wanted to make my dad proud. I knew there would be whispers about nepotism. So I just got my head down and did as good a job as I could do. And that's kind of been my mantra throughout my career: be the best that you can be, and things will come to you. So yeah, that's how those are my sort of career plans at the beginning.
And we should say this, because, and I don't know if everybody knows, do you want to say a little bit about your dad and how who he was and how he influenced your career and how important he was, in fact, to television and beyond, right?
Yeah, some of you may know him, some of you may not. His name was Tamara Howe. He was you may know him from television, but first and foremost, well, apart from being my dad, first and foremost,
hello. Oh, hang on. Oh my God.
Guys, can we just mute? Yeah, can everybody mute? Yeah, that'd be lovely if we could just all mute. Thank you. Chelsea, you could put everybody on mute except for Babs and Tamara. That'd be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, so first and foremost, obviously, is my dad, but he was also a Black activist who'd come over from the Caribbean and spent a huge part of his life, well, the entire part of his adult life, fighting for racial justice and equality here in the UK and overseas. So he was a huge inspiration in my life. His fighting spirit, his refusal to compromise, his strong sense of self really rubbed off on me and my siblings. So I started out with a confidence that I appreciate not every young kid growing up then, most certainly not then or even now necessarily has. So yeah, it has informed a lot of not just me getting into television because I could see it, so therefore believed I could be it, but also being able to hold my own and stand up for what I believed in an industry where, you know, I was often the only one in the room, or often, you know, in a quite intimidating, imposing organizations like, say, the BBC or ITV. So yeah, he was and continues to be a huge inspiration for me.
How having that strength of character, how important is that, or was that for you, to make sure that you were authentic and you had that authenticity about everything you did and all the jobs that you did?
I mean, you know, authenticity is hugely important for me, you know, because it's I think it's such a personal thing, right? It reflects who you are. It's how people will view you. I think it's impossible to be a really good leader if you are inauthentic. You know, if you're saying one thing and then doing another, people quite quickly suss you out. I mean, admittedly, the industry is full of quite a few of those types, but that's never been my raison d'etre. So yeah, I think it's really important. I want people to be inspired by me. I want people to enjoy working with me. I want people to respect me. I want people to like me to a degree. And so I think being true to who I am, being honest with people, being someone who's consistent in their approaches is really important. I can't imagine any other way. It does get me in trouble from time to time, I have to admit, you know, that desire to be honest and speak my truth and tell it like it is, that can get me in hot water and has done it on a number of occasions. But ultimately, I think it's a price worth paying sometimes. On other occasions, I could be a little bit more subtle, I must admit. I'm a work in progress. But no, it is my, I would say it's my superpower. And I'd you know, I'd give it up at, you know, my peril, really.
Yeah, just that's really interesting, like getting it into trouble for speaking your mind. And I think one of the questions we talked about, or one of the things we talked about, is how do you speak your mind, speak your opinions in a way that is honest and true to yourself, but is also healthy for you and for anyone on the receiving end of those opinions, because it might not be something they want to hear, right?
Certainly, I think often isn't. Who speaks to my sister most definitely isn't. It's hard, right? And like I said, I am a work in progress. You know, if I put my mind to it, I'll say everything in the right way. You know, it's not always what you say, it's how you're saying it. Sometimes if I'm rushing from one thing to the next, or it's in a you know, in an intense environment, then I don't dress things up as much. So it does vary. Ideally, I'd like to get my message across without upsetting anybody. But that's not always possible. Sometimes you just got to say what you have to say, and the person on the receiving end is not going to like it, no matter how you say it. So it's just I think being mindful, you know, of how you say something, and being mindful of the person on the other side. You know, are they the kind of person who's really open to receiving your words of wisdom and likes it raw and rough and ready? Or are they someone who needs it dressing up a little bit? And I think we can all kind of flex our styles according to, you know, the person on the other side. So yeah, sometimes I get it right. Sometimes I get it wrong.
And I think you've chatted a little bit about leadership, and I'm going to share, if I may, a quote from somebody. I won't say who it is. It's actually a breakthrough leader. And they're talking about the culture that you have created at Naked. And they said, I've worked at numerous companies, but none of them champion diversity in the way, honestly and genuinely, an honest and genuine way that Naked does. Opportunities are given to seniors from different backgrounds without the typical excuse being used against them. And diversity is actively encouraged at every level. Naked fully supports my development and has given me opportunities that other companies would not. For the first time in my TV career, I am not just a statistic or a tick box, but a valued member of a company that supports and encourages diversity in television. I think that quote would not exist if it wasn't for you and Fatima. How important is it for all of us as leaders on this call to help shape more inclusive cultures, and is that do we have a disproportionate burden to achieve that?
I think it's critical, right? We all know. I mean, it's a sort of perceived wisdom that, you know, change comes from the top, right? So if you're in a position of leadership, you need to be part of that change. I know it's hard. You know, it can be a burden. Some people think, you know, I don't really want to have the burden of my community on my shoulders, but shit, if we want a seat at the table, to be there and not use that to our advantage and to not look down and bring the next person up with us, for me, that feels non-negotiable. I mean, I know that might feel tough if some of you are not that way of thinking, but I think it's really important. I think it is incumbent on us to make that change. Because if not us, then who, right? So yeah, I would implore all of you, when you're in positions of influence, to use your voice, to engage in stuff beyond just the projects you're working on, you know, the environment that you're in, the leadership in that, company. I mean, we try to get people to do that as much as possible within Naked. So we're not just listening to our little echo chamber at the top of the organization. We're talking to others. And I think it's just having it as a priority. You know, I think you said something about people, you know, tick boxing, you know, the way we approach it, well, I mean, it's hard to think because it's just who we are, right? It's just who we are. It's just what we value. It's just what we see in people. It comes naturally. But so, you know, the more of us who look, think, act as we do, the more organic it will become, and the less of a kind of interventionist kind of burden it will become. But we're not there yet, right? So while we're not there, then I say we need to be moving forward at any given opportunity.
Totally. I mean, I agree. We're clearly not there yet, and that means often we will be the only in the room.
Yeah.
How do you navigate those situations and those rooms when you are the only person and you're having to do your job but also represent? So you've got like 2 jobs to do in that room. How do you manage that? How do you navigate that?
I mean, it's something that I've lived with all my life. I'm sure a lot of us have grown up in areas where you're the only person in the room, whether that's at work or in a social gathering or something. So it's kind of that I'm used to. I think it's when you're the only one in the room and you feel like you have to say something. I mean, the amount of times I think, oh God, Tamara, is it you again going to point out that the promo for the Christmas video at BBC hasn't got any black faces in it? Is it you again who's got to point out that there are no people on the shortlist, or the panels at Edinburgh were all white men? I mean, it's just, you know, there is that point where you think, oh my God, it's just too much. But I think what I tend to do is I own it. I mean, sometimes I'll be in a room with a handful of people and there's a wider group, and I'll just say to them, have you noticed something? And they'll go, no. I said, have you noticed that I'm the only black person here? And then there'll be the kind of shock, horror, whatever. So I'll call it as well, so that other people are aware of what I might be feeling in a scenario. And I also own it. I think I said earlier, when we were chatting before, you know, own it in whichever way you can. That doesn't mean be the loudest person in the room and caricature of yourself, but, you know, own it in some subtle way. Own it in what you say, own it in how you dress. It could be a number of different things, but don't feel that there can be a danger you try and make yourself smaller in those situations. I don't know if people recognize that feeling that you have to be smaller. I would say, yeah, you don't flip the opposite side and, you know, overdo it, because that in itself can be irritating. And we see people who do that, and that's, you know, not a great space to occupy. I would just say, yeah, find your own subtle way of owning the fact that you're the only person in that room.
I think that's really good advice. Have you ever walked away from a project or a situation that you felt didn't align with your values and your beliefs, that didn't feel authentic to you?
God, I'm trying to think of. I know recently I saw a program idea that was just so, I can't tell you what it was, but it was just so against every fucking bone in my body, and I made that very clear at the time. And in the back of my mind, I remember thinking, if they go and make this show, I am out of here, right? So that was one example. I've left jobs when I felt I've got to that point where I'm expected to fit in to the point where it might compromise who I am. And I've been, and that's weirdly, you'd expect the more senior you get, the easier it gets, but actually often it's the opposite. And I've walked away from offers of, I don't know, discussions on panels or working groups when I felt like it's been tokenistic. And it's really hard to judge that. And I'm sure a lot of you get that. You know, you get invites to things. You get called up by headhunters and you're like, how much is this because they think I'm right for the job? Or how much is this because they want to have a diverse shortlist, or they want someone on the panel, and we're wheeling me out again, and it's tricky because you do want to represent, and there aren't that many of us, but equally sometimes you feel like so occasionally I've turned things down when I've had too much, and I've had a sniff of tokenism, but nothing hugely extreme.
When we chatted about this before, about having a network and the strength of a network, and I think that's one of the massively beneficial things of breakthrough leaders, is having that support network. And I was chatting to the person I mentor and work with through breakthrough leaders, and they're saying that even though they're still the only in the room, they know they've got this like power of people behind them in breakthrough leaders, where they can sound stuff out and talk about things and feel supported. How important has that been for you? Have you got a network of people that prop you up?
Yeah, I've got an informal network. I mean, I was never, organizations and initiatives like this didn't really exist when I started out. So the network I've got is quite, informal, like, people like you, people like Simone, people like Pat Young, people I've gathered over the years that I will most certainly turn to if I'm unsure about a situation, whether that's how I should respond to something or whether I should apply for something. So yeah, I do. I mean, I'm a big fan of networks on the one hand, because I think they do, as you say, they provide a lot of support. They allow you to sense check stuff when you've got some crazy ass exec who wants you to, I don't know, finish a fine cut within a week, and you're thinking, is this normal? You've got people that you can, just share with and lament with in some occasions. I think one thing we need to be wary with networks, though, is this, this industry, one of the downsides of this industry is that it's run a lot on networks, and often those impenetrable ones that we don't get to be part of. And so it's, difference between a network and a clique, so I think it's always something to be mindful of. And so, like, I wouldn't say audit, but check out your networks from time to time. Look at them. Who's in your network? Is it an echo chamber? Have you got people? Have you got junior people as well as senior people who can help you with your career? Because for me, one of the areas where I probably use my network the most is when I'm mentoring. I've got a really great extensive contact list, as you'd expect after 38 years in the industry, and I use it. And I use it a lot, and I move people around my network and connect people. So it has its many benefits for yourself as your own development, but also to help, the next gen come up behind you.
It's so important, isn't it? One of the other things we've talked a lot about is really important is it's not okay just to do an okay job. How do you manage working consistently harder or smarter without getting physically or mentally exhausted?
You know what? It's not a very physical job, is it, TV? Let's be honest. I spend most of my time sitting on my arse in meetings. So it's more stress that I have to try and avoid. And that normally comes with time pressures, lots to do in a short space of time. And this whole thing of being on and available all the time. I mean, I'm always on my phone. I wake up in the morning. I mean, I'm the worst culprit for that shit. So that's the bit I need to manage the most. I mean, it helps to have a young son of 9, who distracts me from time to time, and I have to prioritize that. That helps. I think you just have to listen to yourself, and also not, not take it all too seriously. We work to live, not the other way around. That's what that's the ideal scenario. And so to put it into perspective, sometimes we can get so wrapped up in delivering a program, making it the best thing ever, that we kind of can lose sight of all the other stuff that's going on around us. And it is TV after all. So I do try and have a healthy amount of sort of cynicism, I suppose, sometimes in a way, so that it doesn't get me, I don't get too sucked into it. That said, I do always want to do a really good job, and I always want to respond and do things on time, and I want people to go away and say, yeah, that tomorrow, when she says she's going to do something, she does it. I don't want to be seen as someone who is flaky and under delivers, or someone who over promises and under delivers. So yeah, I do hold myself to quite a high standard, and so that other people can never have anything. So that, when I say can never have anything, I think my desire to be authentic, be able to say what I want to say and to be who I want to be, depends on me being bloody good at what I do, right? Because if you're not good at what you do and you start trying to talk your talk and whatever, you're gonna people are going to find it easier to shut you down. So the quid pro quo for being able to operate in the way I do means I've got to put my money where my mouth is, and I have to stand up and be counted in the quality of the work that I deliver. So if you're on top of your game, it gives you a little bit more freedom to say your thing and do your thing.
That's so true, and reflective of all the senior roles that you've had, and you continue to challenge yourself. So thinking about your move from the BBC to Vice, what was the traction? I mean, they're polar opposites in terms of culture and
well, that was it. That was exactly it. It was, I mean, I'd been in television by the time I went to Vice. I'd been in television 28 years or something. And I'd been in, apart from my 5 years at the beginning in the Bandung Productions, the indie with my dad, I'd been at ITV for 13 years and the BBC, two quite traditional, not quite, very traditional broadcasters, right? Where things were done in a very specific way, where the culture was quite overpowering, where we were making shows and programs in series and in a not just operationally but creatively in the way that we've been doing for ages. And so when Vice came on the scene, alongside around about the same time as things like Netflix and Amazon were all cropping up, I was very attracted to these disruptors. The fact that it was such a young company that exploded onto the scene, the fact that they were making programs that everyone's going, how the hell did they make that? Stuff I knew we'd never be able to make at the BBC because of our compliance and rules and regulations. So that was what really attracted me there. When I got there, I hadn't really thought it through, I should say, because when I got there, that whole kind of gung-ho, just get out there and make amazing content, ask questions later, was quite tough for someone in a job like mine, where you're meant to be keeping everything on the straight and narrow, on budget, safe, etc. The average age of people there was 27, and I was like quite a bit more than that. I was in my 50s, and people didn't know what they didn't know, but I learned a huge amount being there, being surrounded by people who were just in their naivety prepared to break boundaries, and it was really refreshing, really incredibly refreshing, having spent so long in the sort of safe arms of a company like the BBC. So I'm really glad I did it. I'm quite enjoying the comfort of being in Fremantle again now.
We're loving having you. I've got one or two more questions, so we are going to open it up. So get your questions ready. You come across as super confident, and we all sort of totally respect you for that. But are there situations where you feel vulnerable, Tamara?
Of course, yeah. All the time. I mean, just stupid things. Like I've got a big meeting that I'm chairing and I'm worrying about the agenda, and I want to make sure I'm prepared for it. It's constant. Or like we talked about earlier, when you're going into a situation where you're the only person in the room. Presentations, things like this. Public speaking is my worst nightmare. What other stuff makes me nervous? Pre-drinks at award ceremonies, when you turn up by yourself in your glad rags and you're scanning the room for somebody that you recognize. I hate it. So yeah, there are lots of moments when I have feelings of vulnerability. It could be like at a conference, and you've got an opportunity to ask a question, and you get that burning desire to ask it, but you're like, oh God, do I say something now? And one of the things that I tend to do in those situations when I'm feeling vulnerable, because it's a visceral thing that I feel. It's not just, a psychological thing. Physically, when I get that physical burning and think, oh my God, I hate the idea, that's awful. They've just asked me to speak at this occasion, or, oh my God, should I put my hand up and say what I think in a meeting? When I get that urge and that sort of physical reaction, I know it's time to do. I know it's something I have to do. I know I have to push myself through it, because if I don't push myself through it, it's going to be pushed through the fear. It's going to hold me to ransom going forward. So it might sound slightly masochistic, but when I feel like that, I tend to push through it to make sure that, it doesn't become a longer term issue for me. Doesn't mean it goes away. Doesn't mean I'm not going to feel like it the next time, but I take that as a signal that it's something I should be doing, and it's somewhere that I should be present.
Totally leaning into the fear, right?
Yeah.
Amazing. I'm going to start to open it up if anyone wants to pop their hand up or ask a question.
And also, can I just add to that as well? Do you know, we recently did a masterclass on public speaking, and if for those of you guys who haven't listened to that, it's amazing. And tomorrow I'll send it to you because it's bloody amazing. What she says, and what you're saying, and where I really connect, is that idea that you're serving, or you're serving an audience, right? So it's not about you putting your hand up and saying something. That what you have to say kind of adds to contributes to the conversation. And when you give that little distance, it just makes it easier. So when you get that sense that I have to say something, and then realize that you're not just saying it because it makes you look good, you're saying it because it's important to be said and important. It just changes the dynamics, and it really fuels you.
It does. It definitely does. And it is the one, because you sit in those rooms, 1,000 people put their hands up a lot of the time. You can tell the difference between somebody who wants to just be seen, as opposed to somebody who has something to say and wants to be heard. I would always advise anybody, if you get that feeling, then it is the time. It is the time to speak.
Totally.
Come on, loads of questions. Zena, did you have a question? I know you were saying, do you want to put it in chat? Sorry to put you on the spot, but did you have a question? Okay, we've got questions. Good. Let's do it. I can't see everybody, so you, Babs, you continue.
I can see Nikki's hand up, and Zinnia, did you have a question?
Hi, Nikki.
Thanks a lot.
Go for it, Nikki. See as you're on my screen there.
Hey, everybody. Hey, Tamara.
Hi.
How you doing? It's so nice to hear this, because in a funny way, I've been waiting to speak to you for 20 years, because when I was at ITV as a runner, you were my kind of first inspiration in the UK industry, just seeing you there, just visually representation. And I was there as a runner in the entertainment department, and just, I think you were on the floor above me, and just kind of knowing you were there and seeing you kind of made me feel like I could belong in this industry just from seeing you, literally. And I wasn't brave enough back then to knock on your door.
So long, man.
I know, you know how it is. And that's just how it goes sometimes, and you find your own way and your own journey. And so it's amazing to kind of hear your journey firsthand. And I wish I'd knocked on the door earlier. But in terms of, like, even now, like, you're a busy person and you have your career and you're successful, but even now, for people who want to speak to people in, positions that are successful within the industry, should people still just be knocking on doors and reaching out? People are busy. Should people bide their time? Should they be persistent? Should they keep emailing people if they haven't heard back? Like, I'm relating back to my time then, but even now, is this something that you think people should still be doing?
Absolutely, right? If you don't ask, you don't get. I think I speak to people all the time. Every week my diary's got people in my diary who I'll be meeting for the first time. Invariably, younger people who just wants to have a chat about how they navigate what is quite a complex and alienating space sometimes. So yes, I do. I mean, if you don't want to become a stalker, right? No one wants to be a stalker. And if you try someone several times and they're ignoring you, well, then you're probably not worth bloody talking to anyway. Then, do you see what I mean? They're not interested in making the time. I think everyone should be able to find the time, however busy we are. It's our so yeah, definitely, I would recommend that. And we should chat. We should
Yeah,
catch
yeah,
up.
absolutely. Yeah, we should.
Definitely.
Thank you.
I'm going to take the next, thank you, Nikki. I'm going to take the next one from the chat, actually. It says, do you care what people think of you, Tamara?
Of course, I think everyone cares to a degree, right? But it depends on who the person is. I don't care what everyone thinks of me. You know, if I think someone's an arsehole, I couldn't give a shit what they think of me. You know, I care what my son thinks of me. I care what the people that I work with naked think of me, because I want them to want to work in the company. And if they think I'm not worthy, then that's not going to help me attract good talent. So yeah, of course I do care. I'm not obsessed with being any people's best friend, right? So I'm not that, when I say care, it's not to that extent. But yeah, I want people to like and respect me. Yeah.
Of course. Thank you. Gabby, you've got a hand up.
So let me just qualify that. When I say respect, I don't respect as in, oh, look up to you. I just mean, respect me as in the same way they respect any other individual.
Absolutely.
Hi, Tamara. I'm Gabby, freelance producer and development consultant. So as I've been talking to different people in the industry, one thing that is quite consistent is that as you progress into senior levels, you have less of an opportunity to contribute to projects creatively. I just wanted to know sort of how has your creative output evolved over the years and through your different roles?
Well, my role is I mean, I think everybody's creative, right? That is a bit of an odd thought that creativity is just a domain of the sort of person who's in an editorial position. I've always been in more operational positions, so I've never been hands-on responsible for producing or directing a program. But I know that I recognize what you're saying, because I love being close to program making. I love seeing a program in the edit. I love hearing the stories from the development teams as they're poking around trying to win commissions. So I know what it feels like to move that far away when you're no longer close to those conversations. You feel a bit distant, and it can feel a little bit like you're just pushing numbers around or sitting in meetings. And so if I was a creative in that sort of pure sense of the word, I think I would probably struggle. I mean, I'm really loving being back closer to the coalface in my job at Naked. And I mean, it's a senior role, but because the business is much smaller than, say, the business I had at the BBC, I'm nearer. I can smell it. I'm talking to program makers every day, and that's what I love. So I think it's often a compromise that has to be made. The further up you go, particularly in a big organization, the further away you're going to get. You may get from the thing that you really love. So it's a question to ask yourself. So I think a lot of the time, and I've seen this a lot in all the places where I've worked, where you've got somebody who's a brilliant creative, but they want a promotion, and so they move into a job that's more of a head of department, and it's you can see it sort of sucking the life out of them when they're no longer, and they're not necessarily that good at it. So I think, be careful that you don't, in your desire to move up the ladder, move away from the thing that brought you into the industry in the first place. Ideal scenario, own your own little company where you can be in charge, but still make shows, and it's a win-win situation. Except, of course, when the bailiffs start knocking the door because you haven't won a commission for the last 2 years. So I can see Faraz nodding. There's a pressure there, just a tad.
Were you ever tempted, Tamara, to set up your own indie?
Yeah, you know what? Before I joined Naked, I was having conversations with a really good, ex-colleague of mine, and a couple of us, there were 3 of us. We were getting so excited, talking about the programs we were going to get made and the culture we were going to create and the family and the legacy we were going to, and it literally, if I could have done it without the stress of having to raise the funds, and if I could have lived off whatever £12,000 a year for the next 5 years while we waited for, the channels to commission us, I would have done it. But maybe that's something I'll do in the next sort of towards the end of my career, when it doesn't matter, when once my son's been through school and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I'd love to do it. It's just it takes a lot of energy and a lot of grit. Has anybody on the call done it themselves? Set up their own indie?
Yeah, I have. In terms of what Fully Focused do, we have been under kind of an umbrella of a non-profit organization that makes content with young people from underrepresented communities and also trains them. But we are evolving so that we're going to be a charity and a fully fledged indie. So we're kind of in that process at the moment. But we're in that space where we've had one commission and we're now developing our slate to get, try and find the next batch of commissions, really.
That's good. It's quite hand to mouth, though, I'm assuming. It's quite, I know. Yeah. But Tamara, I know you've got a similar sort of setup, haven't you?
Yeah, I actually spoke at the same time. Yeah, we do the same. So we run Renaissance Studios, a woman-led Black production company in Brixton. And we also run the Creative Clinic, and the Creative Clinic, it also trains young people in different aspects of film and television. And then we've partnered also with like Fremantle in order to get people into working paid jobs. So yeah. Yeah,
I mean, I have much admiration for you guys for doing that. It takes a lot of guts and resilience. And it's slow. It can be really slow out there.
Thank you.
Hi, Shaka.
Hi, Tamara. Just nice to meet you. Nice to meet everyone on the phone call as well. I'm Shaka Henry from Rep.TV. Quick plug, we have a global streaming platform that's available on every device in the world right now. We are completely independent. Something you said, Tamara, kind of struck a nerve with me, because I worked in a sales environment. So I worked at all these corporate companies, going to Barcelona, Cannes, Monaco's, being the only Black person in the room, not being able to hold my temper, being able to go from job to job. But because I could sell, I could make money, I'd still get very good jobs. Even recently, I just left the Institute of Civil Engineers. I was the senior manager there, the same thing. So when you said about the higher you go up, I've worked at high level jobs, and it really is that. And I'd like to say that to everyone, it doesn't go away. It's just how you manage it. And I think my last opportunity is I decided to set up my own platform and go completely independent. I took all the money I made over the years. I took all the contacts I've made. I'd worked at all the Sky TV stations, but because they're not the BBC or they're not ITV, they don't get the credit. But I've worked at the OHTVs, the Yangas, the Claires, all at senior positions. So I just decided we're launching our own platform. I went to a couple of our advertising agencies. They agreed to do our advertising. I went to the community. They got content. They send us content. And we're building this platform completely independently, because we want to give everyone in this call a chance that if you don't get signed over there, come over here. We got studios, we got relationships. So when you said that, it struck a nerve, because I could be making a lot of money if I could put up with it, but I refused to. And I said, we're doing our own thing, and God's blessed us with the opportunity.
Yeah, hats off to you, right? It doesn't, this corporate world does not suit everybody at all.
No.
So, yeah. So yeah, enough respect to you for going it on your own. Wish you the best of luck with it. And send me a link to your platform.
Definitely, I'll try and send one over.
I'm going to pick a couple of questions up. Thanks, Shaka. What's the programme Tamara's most proud of? What is the programme stroke series she would have loved to have been involved with?
Oh, Jesus Christ.
It's like picking a favourite kid, isn't it?
I'm trying to think of the amount of programmes I've worked on over the years. Geez. I guess it would have to go back to the first programme I worked on, which was Bandung File. It'd be before any of your times. It was a magazine show for Channel 4, which was focused on telling stories that were relevant to Black and Asian communities, both in the UK and in elsewhere in the world. It was stories you wouldn't have heard anywhere else, stories that meant something to us, meant something to our parents, our in some cases grandparents, and it was refreshing. I was proud of the output, but I was also really proud of the environment that we had within Bandung, where everybody was encouraged to have an opinion and have a thought. Yeah, it was the best possible foundation for me starting out in the industry. It meant that by the time I left there after 5 years and I was heading off towards London Weekend Television, a more sort of traditional corporate world, I was ready. You know what I mean? I'd got my stripes. I'd sort of, yeah, my foundations were strong, and I was ready to take that on in with confidence. So yeah, that program for me is got to be the number one.
I've got to just pick up two comments. One is that Bandung Files was absolutely pioneering, and the other, for all of us nodding our heads, we're showing our age. But it was absolutely blazing a trail, right? It was nothing like it on telly at the time. And in some ways, when you say, actually, particularly the programs that your dad was making, they had set us on a path, and then somewhere along the line we went backwards, right? Because
I mean, it was amazing. I feel so lucky for what I experienced at the time. I mean, we had Tarek and my dad, two activists running an independent that was making the show that was going out. I can't remember how many times a year, but it was ever present. We had Farouk Dondi at the channel, who was the commissioner. I mean, you just don't see that these days. And I got to experience some amazing things. I followed Jesse Jackson on his campaign trail when he was doing the Rainbow Coalition back in I guess it was the 18s. I went to Jamaica to do a film with Lindsay Crazy Johnson and some others on. And as I land in the airport, my dad picked me up to tell me they just killed Peter Tosh. So I spent a week filming in his house with his wife, witnessing all of that. I mean, some of the places I got to visit, I went to Toxteth post the riots and stood in Granby Street with my dad at one end of the street and me at the other, while some guy with a pit bull dog was railing up against us with the cameras, and Dad and I had to use all our wiles to settle the scene down. And by the end of it, the guy was sitting at Charm. It was sitting there with Dad, full conversation, desperate to be on camera. So I saw stuff that I can't ever imagine seeing again, because of the time, because of the people I was with, because the doors Dad could open. I mean, Dad would turn up in all manner of places, and you could get those cameras rolling in a way that I know very few people could do. So yeah, I was blessed to have had that experience.
Simeon, you've got your hand up.
Hey, Tamara.
Hi.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. You?
Yeah, all good. As you know, I'm a big fan of your father, and I have to say that of my kind of creative life, the proudest moment wasn't being nominated for a BAFTA or Award Prize, nothing. It was actually being asked to write for Race Today in the kind of special edition. That was actually the highlight, because I was such a big
oh, that's nice.
But I wanted to ask you basically was, do you think that any broadcaster today would put your father on air? And what do you make of the current actual landscape when it comes to black television programming? And do you think that actually, what do you make of the work that's been produced? What do you make of the work that's been commissioned, and the actual appetite amongst commissioners?
I think, I mean, to your first question about Dad, I mean, I think, yeah, Dad would have always found his way onto television, particularly given what's happened in the last few years, because he was I would say this is my dad, but I think you really miss his voice. When Grenfell happened, we missed his voice for that. With the George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, missed his voice there. So I think he would maybe more by default, because he was the person that would have something to say and people want to hear from, as opposed to them being proactive and wanting to give him his own series.
But that's really it, isn't it? Because Bandung File, Devil's Advocate, these are iconic programs.
Yeah.
What is it even today?
Yeah, I don't think, Channel 4 was the place for those shows, and we all know which way Channel 4 went in terms of its output. The opportunities for him to be there, and with his style and approach, probably not as many, although there would have been probably a big spike post BLM, like there was with everything. In terms of the programming that's out there now, you know, if I'm honest, I don't watch that much of our terrestrial output anymore. And I think that says something. I watch a lot more documentaries on Netflix and the streamers. As usual, it's almost reminds me of when I was younger, when I would look to things like Sesame Street to see myself reflected on the telly because I couldn't see it anywhere else. And it does feel the moment the quality of output is sitting on those US channels as opposed to UK. So it feels like there is a gap, most certainly. And most of the young people, you can tell by the way they're spending their time in terms of consuming media. They're filling that gap with on stuff online. They're creating their own stuff. They're talking to each other. They're not sitting around waiting for the big terrestrials to deliver to their needs. They kind of, I think there's a danger we might have lost them, if I'm honest. But I am, I'm not that generation. You probably got a better idea than I have of what's going on out there from your peers. What do you feel?
What do I feel? I mean, it's interesting because for the past year, I mean, I've been working as a commissioner at Channel 4, so I can't say too much. But I mean, it's like, I think that because of the commercial challenges on TV, it means that there is a natural aversion to certain risk. I also think that actually, in terms of what often gets pitched, I think that producers are also quite safe in what they pitch, even when they're kind of Black producers. So they're conscious that, well, this isn't really going to work. I think they play to influencers, when sometimes influencers don't always kind of work for linear or create something quite iconic.
Yeah.
So I think that, and things like Devil's Advocate, where your father had like quite a political left-wing perspective, those kind of voices actually we don't really hear that much from. Everyone's a lot more kind of neutral, they're angry about different things. So I think that, I don't know if TV actually can create the kind of work that your father was doing, and I think that's quite sad.
Yeah, I mean, that's why like BBC is so important. That's why, Channel 4's having won the argument on privatization needs to step up on the whole public service side of things, because although, like I say, I watch the likes of Netflix to watch their documentaries, they're not UK stories, they're international stories. And commercial companies, they're counting the pennies, aren't they? They're counting the pennies, and they want bums on seats. And we're just not a big enough audience for them to cater to some of the stories we want to hear. And that's the harsh reality, however depressing it is. But thank God for that, for the digital space, and for Shaka and his platform.
Yeah, absolutely. Cassie, you had your hand up. Are you still, and you're on mute?
Hear me?
Yes, got you. Oh no, we've lost you again.
Hello?
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah,
Don't touch
no,
anything.
I was, yeah, I think there's a few issues. I was, no, I had my hand up for a really long time, but Simeon and Tamara, I think that you kind of answered the questions I was going to ask, because for me it was that obviously the time that you came up in the 80s, and obviously like Darkest Howe, massive Black activist, and you were kind of coming up at a time where there was the workshop movement at Channel 4, and obviously the BBC were doing things that were radical and experimental, and there was lots of things that were speaking to the Black community again. I mean, I guess my question, so I used to run this company called Black and Brown, and like our whole like reason to be was to tell stories about underrepresented communities. So, we were kind of in the feature space. We did this film called Generation Revolution that ended up on Netflix. And, now I'm doing more TV stuff. And I, you know, in the UK, we're finding it very hard to ever get like proper purchase into the work that we're doing. Like, you know, everyone was like, yeah, really great, whatever. But you weren't necessarily getting the things made. And like, even in the TV space, to be honest with you, you know, like I've developed things about Stokely Carmichael, for example, developed stuff about like Black British music and that this is with, you know, broadcasting things like that. And they never necessarily get to the place of getting on to air. I think that, you know, there's been a partial response to it of there being this answer that, you know, maybe it doesn't feel like there's enough of an audience, but do you feel that there is a way that we can make that kind of stuff? Like, that's something that I've been thinking about a lot, because, you know, I think that I'm very much in the space of, okay, you know, you have to like make a living and you have to keep making stuff, shows. There might not always be the things that you really want to make, but I think that there's a massive power in television, and there's a massive like communicative power, and it's not just about talking to Black people or to people of color, quote unquote. I think that, you know, there's a lot of social change that can happen through the making of these programs, and it does feel like it's a shame that there is that gap and that no one can quite seem to bridge it, because, you know, like I think that there's probably more stuff now than there has been for a pretty long period, with like, you know, like Black people at the helm or Black people in front, but it still doesn't feel like it's on the level of, you know, when your father was in the broadcasting space, or that when, you know, you had Chedo, you had Sankofa, or you had the Black Audio Film Collective and all of that stuff, and they were making all of these things. It doesn't feel that we're able to make that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like we said earlier, I mean, I agree that it's definitely much harder. There isn't but there aren't as many budgets. I mean, Channel 4 used to have a multicultural unit at the time when I was coming up, with their own budget specifically to commission those sort of stories, and that doesn't exist anymore. I think some of the commissions put a certain amount aside for diversity in its broadest sense. So yeah, the pots of money aren't there. But, you know, you can also find ways of telling really strong stories that can appeal to a wider base. I mean, when I think of someone like Michaela Cole and what she's managed to achieve with her work, which feels quite uncompromising, but has had impact. You know, there are ways of doing it, or albeit, you know, quite challenging. So I don't think you give up entirely. Just try and think creatively about how you make things a bit more accessible, so you can get access to those pots of money. I mean, certainly when I worked in current affairs, we used to make Panorama, and we were constantly getting our budgets cut because people, you know, we needed to make current affairs because it's part of the BBC's remit, but the shows weren't necessarily rating as highly, particularly in the 9 o'clock slots. And they had to think really creatively about how they told really important stories in a way that they would attract a wider audience, not just to, you know, please ratings, but also to make sure that those important subjects were getting to a wider group of people. And they managed it with some of the topics, but invariably it means it's not every story that's important to us will hit the screens. Well, certainly not the big screens, if that's your ambition.
Thank you for that. We've got 2 minutes left. If anyone's got anything else to ask, or Simone, you've got one final wrap question. I know that the chat's quite busy, and I can see a few of you have messaged me directly about a couple of things as well.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I've had my hand up for a while. I mean, it just seems to me that I really appreciate all the stuff that's been said. I can remember when you were at ITV, so I go back equally as long. But there is, particularly in the kind of coalface of making programs, and as a freelancer, there's a kind of real differentiation in terms of what you can and cannot do that I don't think we've kind of really teased out here. I mean, I've worked as a series director, as a series producer, and again, just like you, the only Black person in the room. And the difficulties in terms of getting other people in are really kind of quite present, partly because of the way in which
a lot of the big TV companies just don't know senior Black people. And I think that certainly when you start looking at the history of Channel 4, and particularly the whole kind of Diamond Front, it washed out all the Farouks, you know, a whole kind of tier of Black people were forgotten about. And therefore, often the time, even when I go to Studio Lambert, you get this kind of, well, how come we don't know you? and I just think that's a kind of real massive kind of problem. And therefore, if they don't know you, therefore, are you genuine? And certainly for me, I think the most fascinating thing about Breakthrough is I just see it as a counter network rather than a network, because it's a counter network to all those kind of the networks that we know have gone on for a long time and worked against us. So that's just kind of one point that I just want to make. The other point that I, just because time's short, is I do think that the streaming channels, because it's a global network, offer a huge opportunity for Black people and for Black content. And I do think, just as you've kind of said, that Channel 4 has lost its way, you know, and just one little nugget. I remember about 5 years ago pitching a show to Channel 4 that was about the broadening out of cannabis in America. And it was all just about cannabis weddings. And we had some, you know, great stories about kind of top chefs doing the food, and basically people that hadn't had cannabis before getting totally off their head, which was totally in line with the early stuff, as you remember, when Channel 4 did Cannabis Night and whatever, and everything else. And I could just remember the stink letter that I got from the commissioners at Channel 4 saying, what on earth am I thinking? So I do think that a lot of these kind of main terrestrial broadcasters have kind of are really in some ways in a TV game a little bit like Luddites, and I don't mean that, you know, in my experience, and I say that in terms of working with them. I do think the more kind of the opportunities are opening up, as we can see, because they all reference the streaming channels. When, you know, how many times do commissioners go, oh, we wish we could have commissioned that, or we're looking for something like that, whereas you know that if you pitch that to them, they would never go for it in a million years. And just one final point is, I just want to kind of just say that I have been developing stuff in a production company for a number of years, and now working with a couple of other bigger production companies to get stuff through, primarily doing Black programs. And what is kind of quite interesting is 2 of the shows now that we're working with on a company that they love, all the time they're opening them up. So we will pitch them as, this is a show, this is the format, it's a driving format, blah, 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 mothers and celebrities, blah, blah, and you pick all these Black celebrities and they go, no, what about these other people? Or we do a food program, and they're constantly again, and we say, oh yes, it's Caribbean and African fusion, and they go, oh well, can we make it a bit broader? So I do think there's a way in which we can think about making Black programs that appeal to a kind of global audience through the streamers, and I think that shouldn't be ignored in any way. I think it's a hopeless game if we're just looking at the broadcasters based here. Yeah. Sorry.
No, I totally agree. It's interesting. The other day, I don't know if any of you saw, and it's not a program made by Black program makers or indeed on Black subject matter, but there was a program on the BBC about Andrew Tate. I don't know if you've all heard of that. Odious man. And it was made by Vice. Mm-hmm. And it was a program that the BBC obviously acquired, and I'm pretty sure they would never have made that show themselves. If you watch it, you know, if had it not been made by Vice first, because of the nature of it. So there are different places, outlets you can go to first if you want to get your stories told, and then sell your programs on elsewhere. I'd encourage people to do that as well.
Totally. It's a really good show. It's on BBC Three if you haven't seen it, and I think there are going to be a few Andrew Tate shows that I think are in development, but I think there's something about that's just that access and the way they tell that story is quite raw and in your face, isn't it? He puts himself right in.
Also, this is like the point that you just made about the audience, the global audience. You've got Netflix is in God knows how many countries around the world, where you know their audiences are bigger than the entire population of the UK put together. So there's definitely opportunity and an appetite to get stuff out there. May not even necessarily be released globally. It could be released in particular countries.
I'm really mindful of time, and there are questions we haven't got to. So I'm going to ask one final question, which I think was a question we chatted about anyway. And I think that for the people that have messaged, particularly direct message me, I will come back to you after this. But obviously, this is a question for Faraz actually, but it's the thing we talked about, which is paying it forward. So what can each of us do to pay it forward to communities that continue to be othered?
What you mean within the industry?
Yeah.
I think be visible is one thing. I mean, what you just said, that people say they don't know who you are. I mean, there are a number of faces on here that I don't know, and I'm sure a number of you didn't know who I was. So I think be visible so people know where to find you. I think hire people, right? A lot of us will be in jobs where we have the power to hire someone and hire people and fight for them. I know it's tough when you go into commissioners and they want to specify everybody from the producer down to the AP sometimes. I think you know, fight for the talent that you want. And that doesn't mean necessarily that everybody is going to be the finished article, right? We know that that's not going to necessarily be the case, given, you know, the industry has been so close to us. But, you know, a big part of our value is not necessarily just the work experience and skills. It's also our perspectives and our voices. So I think fight for people and find ways of supporting them so that you can help them through. I think get out, and when I say be visible, get out and about, you know, do panels, go to colleges. If you've got your own little companies, have open evenings where you can invite people in or attend those elsewhere. You know, make sure that people not just know where you are per se, but also get a sense that we are here. You know, there is a critical mass that gives people the confidence to think that they can operate. I mean, I find it gobsmacking that you, Nikki, just saw me on the floor of Barb all those years ago. We haven't talked for 20 years, and yet I managed to inspire you just by being visible, without even knowing that's what I was doing. So yeah, I would get out there. Yeah.
Thank you. Tamara?
Wow, I mean, like, obviously we could sit here and talk forever, right? I mean, it's just fascinating stuff. And that, yeah, I think that this is the stuff that we talk about on Breakthrough Leaders and how we can be visible and ensure that each of our success adds to all of our success. So we are a critical mass that nobody needs to be scared of, because we're absolutely bloody amazing and don't need to be fixed. So you spoke to that and spoke to the work that we're trying to do with Breakthrough Leaders. So thank you so much. It's been amazing. Thank you, guys. It's so sad. This was our last Breakthrough Masterclass of 2022.
For having me.
And what a joy. And I think it was the perfect way to round off all the conversations we've been having for the last year. And I know that some of the participants here are also some of our Breakthrough Leaders for 23, and some of them that may not be part of the program, but it's part of our community. I hope that you will feel part of our community and that we can support each other, continue to support each other to success. So thank you very much. I'm going to stay on for 5 or 10 minutes more, because I know one or two.
One last thing before I shoot off. In this, just putting my money where my mouth is, you know, I know we're going to meet Nikki at some point, but feel free to share my email address with anybody who wants to catch up and continue the conversation. Tomorrow we're already connected, aren't we?
Listen, do you know what? You're better. Did you hear what she said?
Yeah.
Write it down. You don't listen. Don't be like, yeah. Take full advantage. Who are you tomorrow? Tomorrow you're going to be bombarded with loads of emails. I hope you are. I hope you come back and complain to me about how many people bombarded you with emails. And I'm glad you wish you didn't say that. I hope it's that energy that you bring to me.
Those people that never asks and answers the email, you have to stalk. No, seriously, I will respond. Definitely, it'd be nice to continue.
And continue, and like, obviously we've partnered with Fremantle, so Tamara's part of the family and always easy to reach out to. So, you know, Berita, if you ever need to reach out to Tamara, we have such a great resource in Fremantle. So make sure we lean into them. Thank you very much, people. We will see. I think Remy's session is coming up next week. And I'm sure you've got details of that, you know, I'm terrible with dates, but the last Remy sessions are next week. So make sure that we see you next week. And we will continue. We've got a rap party coming up soon. Lots of exciting stuff. I've loved working with you guys. Gosh, yeah, I hope you continue to stay in the flow. Send in loads of love, and we'll see you all very, very, very soon. Lots of love. I'm going to stay here for a minute because I know a few wanting to speak to me.